his living between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took his journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in loose living. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in the country, and began to be in want. So he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed the swine. And he would gladly have fed on the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and to perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." And he arose and came to his father, and while he was yet a distance, his father saw him, and had compassion. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring in his hand, and the shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to make merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he received him safe and sound." But the son was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, "Lo, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But when the son of yours came, who devoured your living with harlots, you killed him, the fatted calf." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It is fitting to make merry and glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive, and his son, and he was lost and is now found." Please be seated. Glory to Jesus Christ. Good morning.
Good morning.
During the Civil War, there was a young boy that went AWOL from the Army. And of course you know what the punishment for going AWOL is, especially during the Civil War. You were put to death, right? You were hanged for being a traitor. Well, this particular boy was the only sibling of this mother, and the mother had lost the father as well, right, her husband. And so she went to Abraham Lincoln and pleaded with the president and said, "Mr. Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, please have mercy on my son. He's my only child. I don't have any more children. I don't have anybody that's going to come home to me. I don't have a husband. I don't have anybody. Please have mercy on me and my son." And Abraham Lincoln says, "All right, now." After a long period of pleading with the president, he looks at her and says, "I will give mercy and leniency to son. However, I still think he needs a little bit of hanging. See, all of us that go through this life, sometimes we go through these periods of times where we're given a lot of rope, right? We're given a lot of leniency to live our lives however and whichever way that we want. Today we celebrate this parable of the prodigal son. Now, first of all, I really don't like the title prodigal son, because there's nowhere in the gospel does it say prodigal anywhere in that reading. Prodigal, the definition of that word means to spend lavishly and recklessly. That could be, but I more or less do not put that label on the son. And I'll tell you why. This boy, right, we read about, he goes to his father and asks, I want you basically to be dead, and I just want my stuff, and I want to leave. Right? When do you get your inheritance? While your parents are still alive. He wanted his stuff before his dad was even gone and buried. And his father doesn't argue with him, right? A little bit of rope. He doesn't argue with him, and he gives him a little bit of that rope that he needs. He splits up the property, allows him to take it. Now this boy, where does he move, right? Does he move across the street? Does he move to the next street over? Does he move in the same town? No, he goes to a far country. A little bit more rope is given to him. And while he's there, right, he ends up going. Now you got to remember, this is Jesus talking to a Jewish audience, right? But it's also St. Luke, a Gentile, writing to a Gentile audience. So you got two people here that are communicating with the people. So he goes off to a far country, and while he's there, he spends all of his money. Every bit of his money, all of his inheritance, he squanders everything he has. And then, right, what happens? A famine spreads across the land. Is that timing? I don't know about you, but that seems like pretty divine timing if you want to ask me. Right? God gives him a little bit more room. Right? He goes and he says, I'm just going to go and serve these people now. And he ends up in a place where he's serving and taking care of pigs, swine. That's a no-no for any Jew, right? Any Jew that's found is unclean. Even being around pigs, they're not allowed to eat them, they're not allowed to touch them, right? But he ends up in a place where he even looks at the food that the pigs are eating as something wonderful. And he comes to himself, right? He says to himself, the first person he needs to confront is not his father, it's not the people around him, it's himself. He comes to himself, he confronts himself, and he says, what am I doing? And if you read the gospel, right, he has a whole speech that he has planned out to go before his father and to talk to his father about. A whole speech. And he says, I'm going to go home, and I'm going to at least ask God, my father, right, to be one of his servants. There, they eat better, and they're not around many pigs, and they're not eating what the pigs are eating. The servants eat better than the people that I am living with. So he goes home, right? During that time, right, he had that length of rope, a sudden jerk, and a stop at the end. And he met the end of that rope. He found that little bit of hanging that he needed. That little bit of hanging is what caused him to say, I need to look at myself and look and see what I'm doing. But he had to go through all the things that he was doing in order for him to realize that the end of the rope was where he needed to be. And as he was walking home, what happens? Before he even gets to the door, the father is out and looking for his son, sees him at a far distance, and he runs to him. That's very uncharacteristic of any father, right? Especially a Jewish father. That is, most of the time, if his son would have done that, would have rejected his child. But not this father. This father runs to his son. And what does he say? The son starts to give the speech. I have sinned against heaven. I have sinned against God. I have sinned against you, Lord. And I just want my Father, I just want to come home. I just make me a servant. It's better that I'm there. And the Father says, I don't want to hear any more. And he calls his servants. And he says, come, bring the ring. Bring the robe. Bring my son home. Kill the fatted calf. Kill the fatted calf. And bring my son home. He was lost. And he's been found. He was dead. And he's alive again. And he's in there, and he's partying, right? The first thing the father does, and in answer to him, to the son going off to a far country, spending his wealth and partying, is throw his son a party. Right? He throws his son a party. He gives his son what he needs, but under the cover of the father. Now, as the older brother is out in the field, right? The older brother sitting out in the field, he starts to come home from a long day's work, and he hears some partying going on. And he calls the servant, what's going on? What is the party going on? Oh, your brother's come home. Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf, and they're celebrating. And the son, he refuses to go home. He refuses to even go into the house. How dare my father do that for my brother? How dare he? How dare he give my brother the mercy and the grace that he needed to bring him inside the house? I have been celebrating. I have been serving my father all of these years. And not yet has a little goat been slaughtered for me, that I may have a party with my friends. And the father again, once again, goes out to his other son and says basically, what is wrong? What's going on? Why are you so upset? Because he tells him, I'm mad at you. I've served you. I've loved you. And now you love my brother more than me? Basically is what he's saying. You love my brother more than me? He's gone out and he was with harlots. How did he know? How did he know what his brother was doing? Judged him. Judged him harshly. Judged him wrongly. He had no idea what his brother was doing unless he was right there next to him. And his father gives him the same information. You should be rejoicing with me. Your brother was lost and now he's found. And he was dead and now he's alive again. See, all of us, including both brothers, and if you look at the parallel between last week's reading and this week's reading, you can see that it's the same parallel. Right? Last week we have the parable of the tax collector and the publican, right? The Pharisee and the tax collector. I apologize. And you have the same people doing the same thing, basically. This sinner is going home more justified. I am glad I'm not like him, though. The Pharisee says, I'm glad I'm not like him. But yet, the tax collector could not look up to God and he could not acknowledge himself because his sin was so great within him, he could not acknowledge God. He did not even want to look at God because of the sin of his life. And he came to himself and he said to himself, Lord, you are greater than me. Just like this boy that was out in that far country, God is greater than me. Father that is waiting at home is going to have mercy on me, and I trust that he's at least going to make me a servant because I know his mercy. He knew his mercy all along. He knew his Father, but yet sometimes we need to be given that rope. We need to be given that length of rope in order for us to experience the hardships in our lives. Because God, he doesn't stop us from making wrong choices, because sometimes those wrong choices are the things that bring us back to Him more mightily. It's the things that bring us to God and shows us His greatness and shows us His power. Sometimes we get sick. Sometimes we go through hardship. Sometimes we go through divorce. Sometimes we go through struggle. And all those things, if we trust God through all the process, He will bring us back, because sometimes we have to be lost in order to be found again. And sometimes we have to be dead in order to be found alive. It is a wonderful journey that we are beginning, heading towards Lent. These first few weeks before Lent are all about repentance. That's what today and last week, and even we didn't do the reading, as I said, for the Sunday of Zacchaeus, but that's what Zacchaeus was all about too. The chief tax collector that found that mercy, but he had to rise to being the chief tax collector and be steeped in all the sin that he could possibly have to realize it didn't mean anything. And sometimes we just got to be broken in order to know we're there. And we have to understand that God is with us at all times, and that we all need a little bit of hanging in order for us to receive the biggest blessings, for us to receive God's grace and mercy. Whatever it is that God is putting us through or allowing us to go through is for our own benefit. Because the whole goal of His is eternity. God is wanting us to be with Him in eternity. It's for eternal purposes. It's for Him to bring us into the kingdom of heaven and to show us a path to the cross. Christ's ministry led Him to the cross. And then it was the tomb. And then it was to heaven, to the throne. But He had to go through those things. Even Christ hung on the tree before He showed the world the greatest glory of all, the defeat of death. That's what we're looking forward to. Confront ourselves this Lent. Confront yourselves with the things that bother you most. The thing I've always noticed about everyone that comes into confession, the first thing, when they have the courage enough to come to confession, the first thing they usually say is the thing that they struggle with most. First thing is the thing that they struggle with most. And if you look past that a little bit farther, it's always pride that holds them back from not going forward to repent for it. Pride is what began it all. Pride goes before the fall. Satan wanted the throne. Satan rebelled, disobeyed God, fell from heaven, convinced Eve to do the same thing. Eve convinced her husband, Adam, to do the same thing, and it spiraled all the way until Jesus Christ, who said, no, I'm not going to be disobedient to my Father. I'm going to honor my Father and do His will. And it gave us the strength that we needed to be able to have the courage we need to do God's will in our lives. It takes courage to be a Christian. It takes courage to trust God. It takes courage to love Him. It's easy to be angry at God. And most people who don't believe in God are just angry at Him. You let my mother die. You let my father die. You let my child die. You allowed these people to be hurt. You allowed these people to go through this suffering. That's a result of a fallen condition because of the enemy of our soul, not because of God. He gave us the rope that we needed. But now, He's reeling us back in. He's pulling us back in, and He's wooing us in with this love and this mercy. And He's watching for each and every one of us to get to that moment in our lives where we confront ourselves and we will start to come home. And when we start to come home, He will come out to us and give us the ring, give us the robe, kill the fatted calf, and we'll rejoice when we enter into His presence. Let us glorify the Lord as we start this journey into Lent. And let us glorify him for his power and strength. And when you find that little bit of hanging, don't be mad at God. Rejoice and be glad in it, because you know that it's working. He's working his eternal salvation in your life. We glorify and we praise you.
Amen.